If I ask you why you're having this conversation with me, you'll give me a reason. And if I ask you why that reason is valid, you'll give me another reason. And if I do that 5 or 6 times, you're going to run out of reasons. But you're still having the conversation. God. So that means you have faith that the conversation can go somewhere good. And that's not actually a delusion.
No. And actually, you're moving toward God. And I think that's a classic route in our tradition. And just the way you were doing it. Why are we having this conversation? I can give, these particular reasons, but then ask the why again, ask it a third, a fourth, a fifth time. Finally, I'm going to get to something like, well, because I want to be happy. What ultimately motivates the will is some desire for happiness. Well, no, what's happiness? Well, keep pressing that question. It can't be something simply in this world. We all know that doesn't make us happy in the way that we're seeking. It's something like the summum bonum, right? Something like the ultimate good. I want to be happy in the fullest possible sense all the time, which is why, Teilhard de Chardin said this, that I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning unless I believed in God. And that's what he meant, was if you do that kind of horizon analysis of every act of the will, even the simplest, like getting out of bed, you finally come to the summum bonum.
Okay, so let me walk through that. Because I think that's a useful thing to think about. Technically, I've thought about identity in this regard, because identity is a nested structure.
Yeah.
It's also a lens through which we view the world. And so if I'm sitting at my typewriter typing, you might ask me what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And the answer is, well, I'm moving my fingers up and down.
Yeah.
But then that's true. And the next answer is, well, I'm producing words on a page, but I'm also producing phrases, and I'm producing sentences, and I'm producing paragraphs, and then chapters, and then a book. And then you might say, well, are you writing a book, or are you being a professor? And I'd say, no, well, I'm being a professor, pushing my fingers up and down on this keypad. And then you might say, well, what's professor nested in? And the answer to that would be something like, well, good citizen. And then that's nested in good man. And then that's nested in, well, then that's right where you start to encounter what I think are something like religious presuppositions. It's like, well, what exactly do you mean by good man? And I think psychologically, well, that means to act out the mythological hero. And that's exactly the point where that identity touches on something that's, I think, indistinguishable from religion at that end. Now, I'm not sure what that means about God per se.
I would say this, that God in our great tradition could be defined as the good in its unconditioned form. So all the things you've been raising here, so the why, I'm answering with some kind of good, with a conditioned good. The very fact that I can put it in a wider context means it's conditioned. It's good, I'm seeking it, but it's not the ultimate thing I'm seeking. So unless we have an infinite regress, which I think is repugnant to reason.
And immobilizing. There are people who have neurological conditions that put them into an infinite regress, and they cannot act.
Right. So if that's repugnant both, let's say, epistemically and psychologically, we have to come to something that's properly called the unconditioned good. Good in its absolute form. That which is desirable simply for its own sake. So Aquinas will say God is called good because God is the supremely desirable. What do we desire? Thomas says some form of actuality or being. That's why we call God the fully real, that which is most actual, actus purus, right? But I like the analysis that comes not so much cosmologically, but psychologically, from what motivates me. And finally, unless my life just sort of founders into irrationality, I am motivated ultimately by God.
Right. Well, I think so, because I would also say, well, let's reject that argument and say, well, you're not nested in good man, good citizen, hero, and then beyond that, cosmic hero. And I think psychologically speaking, the figure of Christ is, if nothing else, a cosmic hero. And I'm not saying it's nothing else, but it's at least that. Well, what would the alternative be? Well, you wouldn't be doing what was good. Well, then what's on the outskirts of your value structure is something that's adversarial, something that's the opposite of good. And maybe you're likely, in fact, your psyche is not pure, and you vary depending on your faith, I suppose. But but there's no escaping being nested in some sort of transcendent structure like that. And then I think of it this way. So you have these outermost reach of your identity structure, which is something like whatever the idea of good man is grounded in. And I do think it's grounded in this hero narrative. But then I look at the hero narrative and I think, well, that's a biologically, that's an emergent narrative. It has evolutionary roots. It's something like man has discovered that his goal is to move into the unknown, to confront what's predatory and dangerous, and to garner something of great value in return, and to share it with the community. And it's an ancient story. It echoes through the Old Testament continually. It's even there. It's even there. It lurks underneath the accounts of God's creation itself. And that means that outermost rim of identity is something that has an evolutionary origin. And then you think, well, that means that it has to be connected. It's connected with reality in some fundamental sense. Does that demonstrate the existence of God? That's a different question. But you can push, you can make a logical case for the necessity of that hypothesis of goodness to that point, as far as I can tell.
Well, stay first with your example of someone, let's say, who's really wicked. And there are wicked people. We can analyze that psychologically or
two of them are sitting right here.
Well, yeah. I mean, because it goes right through the human heart, as Solzhenitsyn said. But Thomas Aquinas says a wicked person, even the most wicked person, is seeking at least the apparent good. So something that appears good to that person. Now, they could be totally mixed up about it. It's not, in fact, good for them, but at least it appears good to them. So even the most wicked person, Thomas says, is inchoately seeking God, because it's always some good. And now he's got the wrong sense of it, but he's still being drawn and motivated by this first cause of the will, even the most wicked person. See, but I think that's a sign of hope. That means grace is always possible. Now read, whether it's Dostoevsky or Flannery O'Connor and people that talk about the most wicked types, but they're sometimes the place where grace breaks through, because they are seeking God in their perverse way. So in a way, he's got us coming or going. Whether we're Mother Teresa or we're a wicked Dostoevsky character, we're all seeking God in some way. And I agree with you about the Bible. The Bible.
Well, I'm not that optimistic, because I don't think that all evil actions are misguided. I think that and I think that's best illustrated in the story of Cain and Abel. And I took the story of